He was left for dead, chained to a tree. No food, no water, no way out. But just when hope was slipping away, a team of K9 German Shepherds picked up a scent, and what they did next will stay with you forever. This isn't just a rescue story. It's a story about instinct, courage, and the kind of loyalty that only dogs truly understand. When trained K9 German Shepherds were sent out on a routine search, they had no idea they were about to discover a nightmare hidden deep in the forest. A forest ranger, beaten, injured, and chained to a tree. Most dogs would have barked and waited, but these dogs, they took action. You might want to grab some tissues for this one, because once you hear what they did to save him, you'll never look at dogs the same way again. It started as a day like any other in Pine Hollow National Forest, a massive stretch of dense, whispering woods that covered over 80,000 acres of land. For most visitors, it was a place of peace, a quiet escape from the noise of everyday life. But for Forest Ranger Eli Whitaker, it was his second home. He knew the trees, like some people know their streets. He knew the curves of the trails, the secret paths, even which trees housed nesting hawks or sleeping owls. Eli was a man who loved solitude, not because he disliked people, but because nature made more sense to him than the chaos of cities. After 12 years on the job, he'd seen it all. Lost hikers, rogue bears, illegal campers, even poachers hiding in the brush. But he never expected the forest he loved so deeply would one day nearly become his grave. The trouble began with a call, scratchy and short on his radio, barely understandable, about unusual activity reported near a restricted firebreak trail deep in the northern sector. That zone wasn't just remote, it was rugged, nearly impossible to reach unless you knew exactly what you were doing. Eli, of course, didn't hesitate. He was the kind of man who never waited for backup, not because he was reckless, but because he believed speed saved lives. He geared up fast, boots laced tight, hat strapped low, GPS clipped on his vest, and a thermos of lukewarm coffee in hand. The air was dry that day, with wind brushing the tops of the trees, like whispered warnings. The sun filtered through branches in golden streaks, casting long shadows across the dirt road as he took his ATV and headed north. What Eli couldn't know, was that this wasn't just a lost hiker situation. Someone had been watching him for weeks, and they were waiting. By the time Eli reached the firebreak trail, the static on his radio had turned to silence. No more chatter from the base, no weather alerts, nothing, just the low hum of the forest and the sound of tires crunching twigs. He stepped off the ATV, took a few cautious steps into the woods, and that's when it happened. Something struck the back of his head, hard. He didn't even have time to turn around. He woke up hours later, head pounding, mouth dry, hands numb, and chained, literally chained, like some horror movie, to a thick pine tree, deep in the heart of the forest, where no one ever went. His wrists were bound behind his back, with steel cuffs attached to a rusted chain looped around the trunk. His ankles were tied with something like heavy-duty paracord. There was blood on his forehead, and not a single soul in sight. Panic hit him fast and hard, not because he was afraid of pain. Eli had broken bones, survived snowstorms, and once fended off a bear with nothing but a walking stick. No, this was different. This was calculated. Whoever did this didn't want him dead. Not yet. They wanted him to disappear, to be forgotten. And in a forest this big, that wouldn't take long. Hours passed, then a full day. The cold crept in as night fell. Mosquitoes swarmed him. Hunger gnawed at his stomach. His water canteen had been taken. Even his radio was gone. Whoever had chained him there had done it clean. No fingerprints, no clues, nothing. It was as if they wanted to erase him. The worst part, Eli had no idea why. He'd spent the last year investigating a few local incidents. Rumors of illegal poaching camps, drone sightings over fire-restricted zones, even missing wildlife, tagged for conservation. But none of it had felt serious enough to warrant this. This was next level. This was personal. But whose grudge was big enough to do this? As the second night fell, Eli's body began to shut down. He drifted in and out of consciousness. Every sound, a snapping twig, a rustling leaf, sent his heart racing. Was someone watching him? Or was it just the forest playing tricks? Time lost meaning. All he could do was hope. But even hope started to feel pointless. And that's when, miles away, in a completely different part of the forest, the K9 unit was dispatched. The search didn't start right away. In fact, it wasn't until 48 hours after Eli's disappearance that anyone realized something was seriously wrong. At first, the base thought Eli had simply gone radio silent, not unheard of when rangers worked remote sectors. The forest could be patchy with signal, and Eli had been known to take solo recon trips. But when he missed his mandatory evening check-in 2 nights in a row, and his GPS tracker hadn't moved in nearly a day, alarm bells finally went off. His supervisor, a no-nonsense woman named Captain Jenna Rourke, didn't hesitate. She knew Eli, and she knew he wouldn't just vanish, not without calling it in, and certainly not without backup. Within the hour, the search was on. But this wasn't a normal search party. This was a K9 rescue team. 3 highly trained German shepherds, along with their handlers, were called in from a nearby county. Their names? Max, Ranger, and Echo, all veterans in search and rescue ops. Dogs that had found missing hikers in blizzards, tracked fugitives through rivers, and sniffed out hidden avalanche victims buried deep under snow. But even they weren't prepared for what they were about to find. The forest wasn't cooperating. Thick underbrush, misleading animal trails, and sudden shifts in wind made scent detection nearly impossible in the first few hours. The GPS ping they did have from Eli's tracker placed him in the northern quadrant, but it hadn't updated in almost 30 hours. Every minute that passed reduced the odds of survival. "Let's give them air," one of the handlers muttered, unclipping Echo's lead. Echo immediately put his nose to the ground, weaving through pine needles and rocks like he was reading the forest floor. His ears twitched, his tail stiffened. Max followed suit, darting through the undergrowth, sniffing aggressively. Then something changed. Ranger, the youngest of the 3, suddenly stopped. He gave a sharp bark, then another. His handler, Officer Pete Nolan, froze. "He's got something." They watched as Ranger lowered his nose, then took off fast, and the other 2 followed. What started as a slow search had suddenly turned into a sprint. What the dogs were picking up wasn't just a scent. It was fear, sweat, blood, desperation, all woven together in a human signature they were trained to recognize. The handlers rushed after them, ducking branches, leaping over roots. Ranger let out another bark, this one shorter, more urgent. Echo howled behind him. The forest, which had seemed peaceful just moments earlier, now pulsed with energy, as if it, too, wanted to see what was hidden. 15 minutes passed, then 20, and then Max stopped cold. His fur bristled, a low growl vibrated in his throat as he turned his head toward a dense thicket just ahead, nearly invisible, almost like nature itself had tried to bury what was there. And that's when the first handler saw it. Not a body, not yet, but a boot, just the edge of one, sticking out beneath leaves and a fallen branch. "Oh my God," the handler whispered, racing forward. Eli was barely breathing. His face was pale, lips cracked from dehydration, his shirt soaked in sweat and blood. The cuffs had left deep bruises on his wrists. Insects crawled across his arms. He was whispering something, barely audible. "Water, please." Echo whimpered and pressed against him gently, almost like a hug. Ranger sat down right beside him, never taking his eyes off the forest. Because while the handlers moved quickly to radio for medevac, while they cut the chain with bolt cutters and wrapped Eli in blankets, the dogs knew someone had done this, and they might still be out there. But here's where things get even stranger. The chain, the one wrapped around the tree, wasn't from standard forest maintenance supplies. It was old, rusty, industrial, and nearby, about 50 feet into the trees, the K9S found something else. A camouflage tarp. Under it, a stash of supplies, rations, a pair of gloves, an old camping stove, even binoculars. Whoever had left Eli chained here had planned it, thought it through, waited for the right moment, and then vanished. But they hadn't planned on the dogs. They hadn't planned on them. The rescue helicopter arrived 20 minutes later. Eli was barely conscious, but alive. The K9S sat quietly as he was lifted into the air, tails wagging low, ears perked toward the forest, watching, listening, knowing the job wasn't done. Not yet, because this wasn't just a rescue anymore. This was the start of a much bigger mystery. Back at the ranger station, chaos buzzed like electricity. Rescue teams were coming in and out. A medical chopper had just lifted off, carrying Eli to the nearest trauma center. And while his vitals were stabilizing, one thing was crystal clear from the initial medical report. He hadn't just been tied up, he'd been beaten. Blunt force trauma to the ribs, bruises to the face, deep scratches on his arms, some consistent with fighting back. And strangest of all, a single burn mark on his upper shoulder. Small, circular, almost like a brand. The forest wasn't just a place of beauty anymore. It had become a crime scene, and the only witnesses, 3 dogs. Captain Jenna Rourke stood staring at the chain they'd cut off the tree. It was almost medieval, not something you'd find in any ranger supply shed. "This wasn't an accident," she said aloud, more to herself than anyone else. "This wasn't a bear, or a fall. Somebody did this to him, but the question was, who and why? The K9 handlers sat with their dogs nearby, giving them water, calming them down, but even they could tell the dogs were still on edge. Max kept sniffing the air. Echo paced back and forth in front of the station door. Ranger, usually the calmest, sat rigid, eyes locked on the edge of the woods like he was waiting for someone or something to return. And that's when something unusual happened. Echo, the most experienced of the trio, began to bark, not playfully, not out of boredom, but with a warning. A few moments later, a young intern named Claire ran in, breathless. "You guys need to see this," she panted, holding up a worn piece of paper. It was folded inside Eli's field notebook. Captain Rourke took it, unfolded it, read it, and her blood ran cold. The note read, "This forest doesn't belong to the government. He trespassed. He was warned. Next time, there won't be anything left to find. No signature, no initials, just that chilling message written in shaky, blocky handwriting." And the more they looked, the more it all began to make a twisted kind of sense. You see, in the weeks before Eli vanished, he'd filed 2 separate reports, both of which had been dismissed as unfounded. One was about strange campsites he'd found deep in the woods, campsites that weren't listed on any map. The other was about hearing voices at night, not human shouting, but whispers, chanting. He told his supervisor someone was out there, a group maybe, but because he hadn't seen